Welcome back to Don't Forget the Champagne. I'm Nichelle and this is Wedding Planning 101. Today we're going to be talking about wedding cake, which is one of my favorite topics. I have two actually really excellent blog posts on wedding cake. I will link them both down below. The first one on things you should know before you go to your bakery, and the second one on designing your wedding cake. Both are excellent. They're with I worked with local Denver bakeries to get their insight on what makes the wedding cake planning process a breeze. But today we're going to chat a little bit about wedding cakes, the things you should know, how the process works. So the first thing I want to talk about is kind of your options when it comes to dessert at a wedding. The first option is a traditional wedding cake. And there's some options within that. You can do standard wedding layered cake. Something I've been seeing a lot recently, and it's a great way to cut costs if you're trying to do that, is to do like a smaller cake for the cake cutting and then serve your guests mostly out of a sheet cake. Something you can also do with that's a little sneaky is sometimes bakeries will build the top tier out of real cake, and then the rest of the cake will be styrofoam, which is a little bit more cost efficient for you guys. You still get the look of a beautiful multi-tier wedding cake, but you actually serve most of your guests out of a sheet cake, so you get the best of both worlds. The other option for wedding desserts, I guess you could not do desserts at all, but that would be just plain sad, would be to do like a dessert bar or to do any alternative. You love cheesecakes, do 12 different cheesecakes. You love cookies, do cookies. I think you can really, the sky's the limit with this. I think it's silly to limit yourself to like a wedding cake or a dessert bar. And you can also do like a combination where you have wedding cake as an option, but if you really love sweets and you want to have like a full dessert bar, you can do a mix and match as well. I really want to briefly touch on here a DIY option, because I think this is an area where people might consider DIY a little bit more strongly than other areas. I think a homemade cake or a DIY dessert bar is very achievable if you're a baker or you know someone in your life who is a big baker. If you were going to DIY something big, I would recommend this over DIYing your catering, which sounds horrifying, or honestly, sorry, I think it just sounds so incredibly challenging, or even DIYing your flowers, because it allows you a little bit more flexibility as far as timing. With catering, obviously food needs to be prepared like that day. Flowers, you can maybe do it 2 days before. Desserts, you could bake a lot of things earlier, or prep things. Like if you're going to do cookies, you can make all the cookie dough ahead of time and just pop it in the oven on that day. Obviously if you're making a cake, you're gonna have to do it pretty close to the time, or like cheesecakes or something, but there's a little bit more flexibility and options when it comes to timing. A few things to consider though if you're going to DIY. The first thing is your environment. Bakeries know how to work with different environments, so they're able to adapt, but if you're having an outdoor wedding, a lot of desserts can melt like really quickly. So you're going to want to make sure setup isn't too far away from when you're serving dessert, especially if it's going to be in sunlight. Even if it's inside, but it's going to be in direct light. Anything chocolate can melt. Anything with a buttercream, it can melt. Things can melt really, really quickly, and more quickly than you would anticipate. So you want to set things up kind of as last minute as you can. Another thing to think about is if you are closing it off to guests until dessert time, what's your plan for that? Because you're probably not going to be able to set up during reception. So are you going to have just a sign and kind of be okay if guests like sneak a bite or two? Are you going to have a table that you like roll out? Are you going to have what? So make sure to kind of consider what the timing of it both in as far as melting and also serving is going to look like. Another thing that I think guests forget a lot is if you are going to be doing a traditional cake and you're DIYing it, who is cutting? I mean, even if you're getting a cake from a bakery, it's important to think about who's cutting, because your bakery is probably not hanging out long enough to cut your cake. Often it's your catering team that's going to cut your cake. There's generally a cake cutting fee if you're going to have them do it. If not, you are going to have some people do it, and then I would 100% recommend sheet cakes and just like dishing that out fast. Cake can be cut a little bit ahead of time because it can like sit out. I mean, not for hours. It'll dry out if you leave it out for too long. You can't like cut it before like your wedding ceremony, but it doesn't need to be like cut and serve immediately. So you can lose a couple guests for a little bit to go serve the cake maybe like an hour before you're actually serving it. And the biggest thing, if you only take one thing away from this video and you're DIYing, is to please make sure you make a full trial cake exactly the way you're going to want it for your wedding day. before your wedding day or before the night before your wedding day. Like, I mean, like, make all the tiers. What are you gonna do with a cake that serves 150 people on a random Tuesday and a month and a half before your wedding? I don't know, but you have to do it. There is just like no reason you should ever have this be the first time you're making a multi-tiered cake, or the first time you're making this flavor of cake, or even the first time you're making a multi-tiered cake in this flavor of cake. Different flavors are going to react differently, and even with a trial cake, you can't guarantee that it's going to go well, but it gives you a significantly better chance of it going well. Also, if you do a trial cake and you realize this is like way above your pay grade, it gives you a chance to like order another cake before it's too late. Okay, let's rewind and let's say that you are going to go with a bakery, whether that's for a cake or for a dessert bar or cheesecakes or whatever. There are 3 things you need to know before you start talking to bakeries. Your date. You need to make sure they have delivery people available, or even if you're picking it up, you need to make sure that they have capacity to make your cake. You need to know your location. If they're delivering, which for multi-tiered cakes they typically do, because driving one of those is too scary for a regular person. You need to know if you're within their delivery range, and they can also give you a kind of an estimate on what that cost is going to be if they know where you're at. And again, like we talked about earlier, weather can really affect your cake, so them knowing, oh, you're going to be somewhere cold, we don't need to worry about melting, versus, okay, we know that venue can get really hot, we probably want to make sure to do like a fondant instead of a buttercream. That sort of stuff. It's also really helpful to have a budget for your cake, but a good bakery can also kind of help you get there. They can let you know what their typical prices per slice are. They can let you know, okay, this might be a more cost-effective option, maybe doing one of those things we talked about earlier with like the sheet cake. They can help you get there, but having a general sense of your budget can be helpful. Tiered cakes are typically priced by the slice, so per serving, and sheet cakes are often priced by size, and it'll depend bakery to bakery. Some bakeries will price by size until you get up to like 3 tiers. Some bakeries will price everything by serving size. So chat with them, figure it out. I think Google is also your best friend. That way you can get kind of an idea, and you're not like, my budget for a cake is $30 and I would like a 7-tiered cake that's hand painted. They can give you a more reasonable estimate. That way you aren't going in with a budget that's unfeasible. Next up is a fun step. It is a cake tasting. Do realize that most of the time these cake tastings do cost a fee. Normally right around $20. This is because I don't want just like anyone coming in and eating cake. It's like expensive for them to have prepared all these things. Just like with catering, you're probably gonna have to pay for a tasting, but a lot of times this can, if you wind up going with that bakery, it can be applied towards the cost of your cake. I think it's really important to make sure to look at lots of different pairings. You want to make sure that you're not only looking at the frosting and the cake as individuals, but also considering them as pairings, thinking about fillings, thinking about frostings, eating them all together, making sure that the things you like. They will probably provide the basics at your cake tasting, but if there are any flavors that are out of the ordinary or anything that you know for sure you want, make sure to request that at your tasting. Also make sure to ask about seasonal cakes based on the season your wedding's taking place in. Maybe you're doing your cake tasting in the summer, but your wedding's gonna be in the fall, and they have like a beautiful spice cake or a pumpkin cake, and that might be a great option, even if they might not put it in the like tasting. So make sure to ask about that, because there are sometimes some like really fun flavors that they only have for seasonal times, and they should be able to prepare you a little bit to do for the tasting, but they might not unless you ask about it. Other things to consider. There are, beyond the cake, there are several different costs that come from like cake adjacent things. The first thing is the delivery. Like I said, most bakeries like to deliver their cakes that are bigger than a couple tiers, just because it can be a little bit tricky to transport it all in one piece. So a lot of times what they'll do is transport it in a couple pieces and assemble it on site. So often there'll be a delivery cost with that. You also want to chat with them about rentals. A lot of times they'll rent out like the cake stand. If you're doing dessert, you're renting out a bunch of display, or if you're doing a dessert bar, there'll be like a bunch of different displays and stands and things. You might even be able to rent like a cake topper, or maybe you're even renting that fake cake that we talked about. They want that back at the end. They use the same cake for multiple weddings. Make sure to have a conversation with them about those and those items if you know for sure you're going to want to rent them, or if it seems like they're pictured in a lot of the items you're looking at. A lot of times cakes will have the bakeries will have a book of wedding cakes, and you want to double check about the cost of renting those items. Normally it's not too much, but it's important to have a full picture of cost before you book anything. And then the last thing is actually probably not going to be through your bakery, but instead through your catering company, and that is the cutting fee. Most of the time catering companies will charge a cutting fee to take your cake, cut it up, and serve it to your guests. Sometimes they do that by slice, and sometimes it's just an overall fee, but you want to make sure also to factor that in with your cake costs and your catering costs, so it's not an unexpected charge at the end of your wedding day. Now the fun part, design. I think there are some really amazing bakeries that do amazing, beautiful work. I think your cake is one of the best places to showcase your personality. I think it's a great place to really get creative, put little details that are personal to you guys and part of your love story. Even if you're gonna do a really basic cake, a cake topper can be a great way to do this. Etsy has some really beautiful, amazing, custom personal cake toppers. But if you are doing a cake topper, make sure to talk to your bakery about your cake topper. I had a wedding a few years ago, and they had these beautiful ceramic birds. They were like doves that they wanted to use for their cake topper, and they were gorgeous, but their cake was like a really soft cake, and it was like buttercream and just like soft. It was like a pretty cake. It was pretty basic, but the ceramic birds started to like sink into the cake. Luckily it wasn't, they like didn't go through, but I remember the bakery typically sets up those things. If you have flowers, if you have cake toppers, you'll leave them there and the bakery will put them on your cake once they deliver it. But I remember the woman who was there setting up the cake was so nervous, and she was talking to us about it, and she was like, I wish they would have told me. We would have just stuck like a dowel in the top to give them a little bit more support. Bakeries are great at doing that, but they just need to know. So if you are doing a special cake topper, or even just like a regular cake topper, make sure to talk to them about it. Bring it in if you can. Send them pictures so they know like how to prepare your cake for the cake topper. And like I mentioned, most bakeries will work with florists to add flowers to your cake. Most of the time the bakery is going to be the one placing those flowers, because they have the tools to like adjust the frosting, and you know, they know how to get them so they stick in there, but they will work together to kind of figure out what they'll need from the florist and vice versa. But you want to talk to your bakery about that when you're doing your initial consultation to see if that is something they do. They work with florists, if they've worked with your florist, if you've already selected one, or if you haven't, do they have any recommendations for florals? If you are doing some real flowers on your cake, which can be like an affordable-ish way to add a little bit of texture and color to a cake if that is something you are looking for. All right, that is it for cake today. Let me know, as always, if you have questions down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, give it a like, and if you are looking for more wedding planning content, you look no further, right here. Don't forget the champagne. Subscribe to this channel if you are looking for more wedding planning videos, and more shall be coming soon. There's good stuff on the channel if you haven't checked it out already, and I will see you very, very soon.